Hey folks, today we're covering Tinto Talks 55 for Project Caesar, aka EU5, and continuing from last week, Johan's going to go through some more systems in the game that have had changes since they were initially announced in the earlier dev diaries. This week is going to be all around the political side of the game and the changes that have been made. So the first thing he's going to talk about is estate power. The power of the estates is one of the most important aspects to the core loop of Project Caesar, so much so that we had to rearrange what we show in the top bar in the UI. This was added so you could easily see each estate's current power and satisfaction without having to go into a special screen to do so. This is a great change. I'm always for UIs showing you information at a glance so you don't have to go digging into UIs to find it. Especially as he says here, the estate power and satisfaction is very important. In EU4 it was very important, but even more so in this version of the game by the looks of it. As part of the gameplay loop is all about breaking the power of the estates and strengthening the central state in a modern country. Basing the core power of the estates to how many pops they had made a gameplay where urbanizing and developing your country would weaken the central government. The main change to combat that is that the amount of pops of a certain estate impact their power, but also impact the crown power with the same base value before any privileges or laws kind of modify that for the estates. This makes the relative power distribution between the estates feel logical, but the weakening of the crown is due to the privileges granted, so kind of taking it away from like an automated system and really making like the decisions you make around your privileges actually a lot more impactful in your estates and like how much power you have. This further ties in with the advances increasing crown power and the increase in absolutism in the later ages of the game. So again, kind of reinforcing that, really making it so the choices you make actually impact your realm a lot more than it sounds like it was doing previously. And you can see in this first screenshot here the estate power of the Umara and the kind of modifiers here that you can see. The aristocracy societal value, they're going to talk about societal values at the end of this dev diary. Land rights, primacy of nobility, royal marriage rights, all these different modifiers that you've got to really change how much power they've got. Again, if you've played EU4, none of this is too crazy, kind of way out there from how that game worked. But I think we've seen during the dev diaries that it is going to work that little bit differently here and the effects and things that it has on your realm. As all characters in the game have an estate, they've also made a change where giving characters command of an army, command of a navy, or a cabinet position also increases the power of the estate they belong to. A total of 25% for armies, 25% from navies, and 25% from cabinet positions as well. This is another sensible change. I mean, it makes sense. If you had a bunch of nobles in your army, they're going to feel more powerful than if they weren't in those roles, so it does make logical sense to add some modifiers to that. Connected to this, the direct family of a ruler is now always considered to be part of the crown estate, so if you want to strengthen the crown, you may want to risk them when commanding armies. And you can see that here, the crown power, estate power, obviously, how many people are affecting it. And again, as he says here, like all population now do feed into the crown power at like a base amount, not as much as the other ones, but there is some there. You've got high legitimacy, traditional distribution, and then the crown prince here is also on the cabinets that is helping as well. And you can see here, estate power of the crown is below 25%, probably early on in the game here, not really getting that much power centralized. And you can see the effects that has on your realm. This will probably get much better as you progress through the game, depending on where you kind of take your country, if you want to centralize things, or if you, end up not having a royalty or anything like that. The next thing they're going to talk about is the Parliament. When it comes to the Parliament, they keep adding new agendas and issues from feedback and internal testing, but some important changes have come from the, I was going to say players, but none of us have played it, but the people reading the dev diaries. First of all, they've added a Dutch-style parliament with only nobles and burghers, which you currently can access if you have low Franconian culture. They've also made it so if you keep giving out unique privileges for the nobles in Poland, you will end up in a situation where you need 100% support to pass anything in parliament. So two, very flavorful changes, just kind of added in here without much fanfare, but they are going to be obviously, if you're in those areas, you are going to get that special content. And then they've also, this is great actually to see, they've actually added a building for your parliament, which does make sense. This will be available in the Age of Discovery, and you can build it. And as it says here, this is the House of Parliament, and this is where your parliament is going to convene, try tell you what to do, and you want to decide if you want to do that or not. So you can see it affects crown power, permanent parliament, yes, and then the requirements to keep this running and things like that. As I said before, they are going to talk about societal values and government reforms. While they're happy with how societal values were indirectly influenced by laws and privileges, They had the problem that eventually anything with a drift towards one direction would eventually get to the extreme. Now, they could have changed this by lowering the amount it would drift, but that would make it rather dull gameplay, and eventually you would get to extremes anyway. So yeah, if you had all the modifiers, we talk about this a lot in Paradox games, just the modifier stack here, things just get kind of out of control after a while. They've noticed that is the case here with the societal values kind of moving things towards one of the extremes very, very quickly once you start to stack up some of these numbers. And as I say, they could have just lowered the numbers, but ultimately, would that have helped that much? So instead, what they've done, and we've seen this already last week, is they've added a soft cap to how this works. So this will modify how big the drift will be at 100 times the current drift. So if you manage to stack up, say, 0.75 monthly towards naval, then you would get the values all the way up to 75 naval before it stopped there. If you drop it to less than 0.75, you still will be at 75 naval though, as you'd not progress to the other side until you get all the way to at least 0.01 to land. This has the added benefit of you being able to shape your country how you want over a longer period of time, and even if you want to be a humanist country, you may not get much further than 65 on that slider, so you may not be willing to give up other aspects to get to that point. So quite a lot of numbers and stuff in there, but basically just making it so the kind of drifting of societal values is a little bit kind of spread out a little bit more, and you can't kind of swing it each way crazily over short term if you could stack up enough of the modifiers. But as always, I will leave a link to the dev diary in the description down below if you want to reread through this. But that's basically the gist of it, just making this make a lot more sense and not be as affected by high numbers. It does kind of soft cap you at some point. And you can see here, capital economy versus traditional economy, the societal value, which way you want to move this. The current impact of 70 towards traditional economy is building cost is more expensive, but everything below that is getting better. As you're not really moving into modernity, you're kind of keeping your agricultural economy going and not that bothered about building, manufactories and all that kind of stuff as well. You're kind of keeping old school with your economy. And you can see the other changes in the bottom of that tooltip as well. While working on adding content this year, they've also added government reforms to every age. And in doing so, they also decided to tie some of them to societal values. So now about half the government reforms that are available to each country require that a specific societal value of at least 50 to be selectable, and if you drop below that, you will lose this reform. Some examples include that religious tolerance requires a country to be humanist, whilst banking ledgers requires a country to have a capital economy. That just makes sense to me. Having these reforms, you need to have your country kind of going in that direction anyway for you to be able to do those. It wouldn't make sense if you had like banking ledgers but you weren't a capital economy. That wouldn't really make sense that you got those bonuses when your actual country itself wasn't like that. So I do like they've kind of tied them in here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Some of you, I guess, might think, well, I just want to select them anyway, but I think it does make sense to make some requirements to make it so it's a little bit more specialized. Otherwise, you'll also get to the point where everyone just picks like the meta options, and it doesn't matter really what your country is. I'm just always going to choose banking ledgers no matter what if it's the best one, whereas now you actually have to move your country in that direction to pick up that option. So I think that is a good change as well. And then the last thing they're going to talk about this week is proximity and control. The proximity and control gameplay loop is one of the most beloved by their playtesters, and it has been tweaked a fair bit since they initially talked about it. This was one of the earliest dev diaries, so obviously they've had a lot of playtesting since then, and they have made some changes. So proximity now traces along rivers, where it is even easier to propagate proximity and market access downstream. This is how I thought it worked, but I guess it didn't work this way. I thought that's how proximity works, or maybe it was control that worked that way. I can't remember. I'm sure they talked about previously that rivers would help you in this, but anyway, it definitely does now. So you can see in the screenshot the proximity to capital and the proximity impact as well that this gives. And you can see the modifiers that this affects. And as we know, the higher you can get your proximity, it obviously makes it a whole lot easier to do other things in that part of your realm. So that is the modifiers that you get with this. The buildings that act as proximity sources besides the capital, like the bailiff, have also been made a bit more powerful, but also more expensive. I wonder if this is so you can't quickly ramp that up relatively early in the game. So they are more powerful, but you probably can't pick them up as early. I wonder if in playtesting you could get the bailiff and things really early, and then that kind of negated this system, especially like mid to late game. It'd be interesting to know why that change was made, but I would imagine that might be why. They've also changed how roads are built, slowing them down by 50% as default, and rugged terrain like mountains makes the road building far slower. Again, I wonder if that's because you could just build them too quickly and they made too much of an impression early on. As we've seen with a few of the things over last week and this week, the changes they made seem to be like smoothing out the curves of getting power and things like that. And I wonder if it was the same with roads. They've also tweaked maritime presence with adding a decay to the current value. So you always invest in naval infrastructure and or your navy. Your control propagation over coastal sea zones is limited. So again, a similar kind of thing. I wonder if the naval presence, you could just build some buildings. You could have like one fleet and then you would pretty much have like a base to your maritime presence and you could just keep that and you really didn't have to put any more effort into it. Now with a decaying value, you're always, as he says here, having to invest in the system to keep that control. It's not just something you can be like one and done with. This makes, again, a little bit more interesting to play, I would think. They've also improved the impact of some buildings, and navies also increased maritime presence in every sea zone in the sea zone province they are currently in. There's also an objective that you can assign your navies to patrol any area or province you want, and it will move around, increasing your maritime presence. And you can see here the Neapolitan presence in the Gulf of Napoli, and the modifiers here. It will change by 0.09 in the wrong way, due to having the first navy with 0.00. So I guess they don't have many ships in this navy. And then some other presence modifiers. I guess they've got buildings in those, like docks or something. But then the new decay, 0.25. Well, you're losing all this basically at any point because you're not interacting with this system actively enough to actually negate the decay that's happening. I wonder if there's going to be some buildings or advances that reduces that decay, though. That seems quite high. But again, I guess early on in the game, you don't want people just grabbing a bunch of maritime presence and then it actually being really hard to dislodge them with somebody else. So again, I think all of them, as we've already said, all these changes are really around just making things a little bit more dynamic. You having to actually interact with these systems a little bit more. They've done a lot of playtesting, it sounds like. I mean, obviously they have, and they've probably seen that it gets quite stale. Somebody probably gets this very early, and then it's very hard for the realms around them to actually dislodge them and become the main presence in that area. And with that, that is the end of the Dev Diary this week. Next week, they're going to talk about diplomacy and military and some changes they've made around there. I would think for the military, there's probably quite a few changes. For diplomacy, I don't think there's been anything too crazy. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, but there's nothing that's really stood out as being like crazily out of place so far, but there's obviously going to be some changes coming to that as well. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hit that like button if you've enjoyed the video today, and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. I'm covering this game up to official announced launch and beyond, and I also cover Crusader Kings in a very similar manner. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you all next time.